The first sleepless night after the reading of the will, I kept turning the same thought over in my mind. What if this was a mistake? Somewhere in Harper's high-rise office, maybe a clerk had typed my name instead of a cousin's. But the letter was clear, and the lawyer's face had been stone when he read it aloud. There was no mistake. What shook me more than the money itself was the ripple effect. My phone buzzed relentlessly. My sister, suddenly syrup-sweet, called to see how I was holding up. Devin sent a text that read, "Hey man, we should grab drinks soon. Got a business idea I think you'll like." Colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months popped out of the woodwork like opportunistic weeds after a rainstorm. Ruth, however, looked at me differently. "He saw something in you," she said, her voice steady. "Don't squander it." I wanted to argue, wanted to protest that I wasn't chosen. I was just standing in the right kennel at the right time. But something in her gaze told me she believed it. And if she believed it, maybe I had to as well. The lawyer, Mr. Ellison, summoned me back a week later. His office smelled faintly of cedar and polish, the kind of place where silence carried weight. He folded his hands on the desk and said, "Mr. Harper left no children, no spouse. His fortune is divided among several causes, but your bequest is unique. It came with instructions." My stomach dropped. "Instructions?" He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. In his own hand, I turned it over. My name, scrawled in spidery ink, for the one who did not give up. My pulse quickened as I broke the seal. The letter inside was short, almost painfully so. "You reminded me of her, the patience, the quiet strength. She would have wanted me to choose you, use this gift to save what I could not. D.H." I read it 3 times, then looked up at Ellison. "Who's her?" The lawyer's lips pressed into a line. "That is not for me to say. Perhaps you'll find out if you follow his path." His path. The words clung to me like burrs. Over the next weeks, I poured myself into the shelter. I paid off the debts that had been gnawing at its budget. I bought new kennels, modern surgical equipment, proper heating for the drafty corners. The staff and volunteers cried when they realized we weren't going to close our doors but expand them. For the first time, Haven's Paw felt alive, vibrant, safe. But with the money came attention. Reporters sniffed around, curious about the ordinary volunteer-turned-millionaire. One ambushed me outside the shelter, microphone thrust forward. "Why do you think Harper chose you?" I muttered something about luck and ducked away, but inside the question dug deeper. Why me? Why her? One night, I found myself in the shelter office long after everyone else had gone home. The rain hammered the roof as I sifted through old boxes, records stacked from floor to ceiling. And there it was, a faded photograph tucked between annual reports. A younger Daniel Harper, hair thick and dark then, standing beside a woman with warm eyes and a German shepherd at her feet. On the back, in neat cursive, Anna, 1983. When I showed Ruth the next morning, she went pale. "That's his sister," she whispered. "Anna Harper. She ran the shelter before it was official. It was her dream." "Where is she now?" "Dead," Ruth said softly. "Car accident. Long time ago." After that, he poured money into Haven's Paw. But he never spoke of her. I stared at the photo, at Anna's smile. Could she be the her he meant? Was I just some faint echo of a long-lost sister? The thought chilled me. Was this inheritance about me, or about replacing someone he could never let go? That night I dreamed of Anna. She stood in the kennel aisle, her hand brushing the dogs' heads, her voice telling me, "Don't waste it." When I woke, sweat-soaked and shaken, I knew my life wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to Haven's Paw. It belonged to Harper's memory and to Anna's dream. But the more I leaned into the mission, the more I noticed shadows moving at the edges. A man in a dark car idling across the street too long. A letter slipped under the shelter door. That money isn't yours. At first, I brushed it off as jealousy. People were bound to resent sudden fortune. But when the back window of my car was smashed one night and nothing stolen, I felt the first shiver of real fear. Whoever Harper had left out of his will wasn't laughing, and they weren't going to walk away quietly. The police officer who came to take my statement barely glanced at the shattered glass. "Probably kids," he said, jotting notes with mechanical indifference. "We'll file it, but don't expect much." I wanted to believe him, wanted to think it was random vandalism. But when I returned home that night, another envelope lay waiting on my doorstep. No stamp, no return address, just my name in block letters. Inside, one sentence in bold black ink. "You don't deserve his money." I sat on the couch, the letter trembling in my hands, while my mind spun in circles. Who was this? A disinherited relative? A bitter business rival? A stranger convinced I'd stolen what should have gone to the shelter? The next morning, at Haven's Paw, I tried to keep my voice steady as I told Ruth. She frowned deeply. "You need to be careful. Harper had enemies, even if he never admitted it." I laughed nervously. "Enemies? He was a billionaire, sure, but this is just an animal shelter." Ruth's eyes sharpened. "Don't fool yourself. Money that size changes people, makes them dangerous." That night, lying awake, I couldn't stop replaying the words Harper had written in his letter. Use this gift to save what I could not. Save from what? Or from whom? A week later, I got another call from Ellison, the lawyer. "Mr. Harper's estate isn't entirely settled," he said. "There are complications." "What kind of complications?" He hesitated. "Family members, estranged. They've filed challenges. They believe your bequest was made under undue influence." "Influence?" I nearly choked. "He barely knew me." "Exactly their argument. They'll push for it in court." For days, I felt the walls closing in. The media painted me as a mystery, the volunteer who walked away with millions. Online comments seethed with envy, rage, conspiracy theories. Strangers called me a gold digger, a fraud, even a thief. The shelter became my only refuge. Dogs didn't care about lawsuits or headlines. They wagged their tails, licked my hands, leaned against me for comfort. But even there, I noticed the volunteers whispering, eyes flicking toward me. Not all of them celebrated the upgrades I'd brought. Some muttered that I was using Haven's Paw as a stage for my newfound wealth. One evening, as I locked up, I noticed someone standing at the far end of the alley. A man in a dark coat, his face hidden in shadow. My pulse spiked. I called out, "Can I help you?" He didn't answer, just turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing against the brick. That was the night I decided to dig deeper into Harper's past. I started with the photo of Anna. Old newspaper archives revealed she had been beloved in the community, a tireless advocate for strays. But her death wasn't just a car accident. It was a crash caused by a drunk driver who fled the scene. Harper had spent years tracking the man, pouring money into private investigations, only to find the culprit had vanished abroad. Beneath every article, Harper's grief was palpable, his fury simmering. And then, abruptly, his public life quieted. He became the recluse I had heard of, hiding in his towers while funneling money into Haven's Paw, as though it were the only thing keeping him tethered. Late one night, while scrolling through scanned court records, I found a name I didn't recognize. Leonard Harper, a cousin. The same cousin who, according to a legal blog, had recently filed to contest the will. That explained the shadow at the edge of my life, the smashed window, the letters. But why go so far? Why stalk me instead of fighting only in court? I got my answer 2 nights later. I was closing up the shelter when the power cut out. Darkness swallowed the aisles of kennels, and the dogs erupted into panicked barking. My flashlight beam wavered as I stumbled toward the breaker. That's when I heard it, a whisper in the dark. "You don't belong here." I froze. my throat tightening. The beam of light caught a figure at the far end of the corridor, watching me. The dogs snarled, pressed against their gates. Then the figure slipped into the shadows and was gone. The next morning, I stood in Ellison's office again, trembling but determined. "Tell me everything you know about Harper's family," I demanded. "No more half-truths. If I'm being hunted, I need to understand why." Ellison exhaled slowly, as though bracing himself. "Then you'd better sit down, because the Harpers, they don't just want your money. They want to destroy what Daniel built, and you're standing in their way." Ellison reached into a drawer and pulled out a worn, leather-bound folder. It was thicker than a phone book and heavy with papers that looked like they'd been handled too many times. He slid it across the desk toward me without speaking. "What's in there?" I asked. "Everything," he said grimly. "The truth about the Harper family, or at least the part that concerns you." My hands hesitated before opening it. The first pages were court records, lawsuits between cousins, disputes over properties, accusations of embezzlement. The Harper name might have been gilded in public, but behind the curtain it was knives and blood. I flipped until a newspaper clipping caught my eye. "Leonard Harper," the headline read. "Billionaire's cousin indicted for fraud." In the photo, Leonard looked eerily like Daniel, but colder, harder. "Leonard ran one of Daniel's development arms into the ground," Ellison said quietly. "He used Haven's paw as a laundering front. When Daniel found out, he shut it down and forced Leonard out. Leonard never forgave him. He's been circling ever since, waiting for Daniel to die so he could take what's left." "But why me?" I whispered. "Because Daniel gave you the one thing Leonard wanted most. Not just the money, the keys, the authority." Ellison leaned forward, his eyes grave. "You don't just have $10 million. You have controlling interest in Haven's Paw's trust. That means you can decide where its future goes. Leonard can't access any of it unless you step aside, or you're removed." Removed. The word landed like a blow. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers trembling. "What am I supposed to do? I'm not a CEO, I'm just—" "You're not just anything anymore," Ellison cut in sharply. "You're the only person Daniel trusted." I left the office in a fog. Outside, rain slicked the pavement and neon lights blurred in the puddles. The city felt suddenly hostile, every stranger's glance a potential threat. Back at the shelter, Ruth found me sitting on the floor of Kennel 4, a trembling terrier in my lap. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said softly. "Maybe I have." I told her everything: Leonard, the folder, the trust. She listened without interrupting, her hands folded tight against her apron. When I finished, she said, "Daniel knew this would happen. That's why he chose someone like you. You don't scare easy." I laughed bitterly. "I'm terrified." "Good," she said. "Terrified means you're still thinking. It's the ones who stop being afraid who do stupid things." That night, for the first time, I locked the shelter's doors and windows twice. I changed my phone number. I installed cameras. Still, sleep didn't come. It was 3 in the morning when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A man's voice, low and oily, slid through the speaker. "You're in over your head." My heart thudded. "Who is this?" "You know who," he said. "You're sitting in my seat. Enjoy it while you can." The line went dead. I sat in the dark, clutching the phone, realizing Leonard had crossed the boundary between threat and action. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a countdown. 2 days later, a small padded envelope arrived at the shelter, addressed to me. Inside was a single dog tag, old and tarnished, the name stamped on it: Anna. I stared at it until the room spun. This wasn't random. Leonard had dug into Harper's deepest wound. He knew about Anna, and now he was using her memory like a knife. That evening, Ruth found me at the office desk, the dog tag clenched in my hand. "What is that?" she asked. "Proof," I whispered. that he's watching, that he knows exactly how to break me. Ruth's jaw tightened. Then don't break. Daniel didn't pick you because you were perfect. He picked you because you're stubborn. I closed my eyes, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The inheritance, the shelter, the legacy of a woman I'd never met but now felt tethered to. Leonard wanted me to quit. He wanted me afraid. But as I looked around the shelter, at the rows of kennels and the dozens of eyes watching me with unspoken trust, I felt something shift. The ember that had once kept me returning every weekend began to flare. If Leonard wanted a fight, he'd get one. I called Ellison the next morning. Draw up whatever papers I need to lock Haven's paw tight. I want every loophole closed, every back door sealed. Ellison hesitated. That will make you a target. I already am, I said. Let's make sure Daniel's legacy isn't. That was the start of the war, a quiet, legal one on the surface, but under it, something darker. Because Leonard wasn't going to stop with court filings and phone calls. And I wasn't going to stop protecting what had been entrusted to me, even if it meant stepping fully into Daniel Harper's shadow. Ellison's papers went into motion like dominoes. Overnight, the trust was fortified. Ironclad clauses layered over Daniel Harper A.S.'s original structure until Haven A.S. Paw might as well have been locked inside a vault. It should have comforted me. Instead, it painted a target on my back. The morning after the filings hit the court record, a black SUV tailed me from my apartment to the shelter. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but when I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up, so did it. Only when I pulled into Haven's Paw's lot did the SUV glide past, tinted windows revealing nothing. I told Ruth. She chewed her lip and said, "You can't keep doing this alone. Daniel didn't." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "He had people, not lawyers, friends, people who believed in what Anna started. He just kept them quiet. After her death, he lost trust in most everyone. But I know at least 2 still live in this city. Maybe more." The thought lingered with me. Maybe I wasn't fighting this battle alone. That night, I pulled Anna's photo back out. Her smile, the dog at her feet. It felt like an anchor. I flipped it over again, staring at the neat cursive. For the first time, I noticed faint pencil marks in the margin, almost rubbed out. A phone number. My heart hammered. Could it really be that simple? I dialed. The line rang 6 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Who's calling this number?" I swallowed. "My name is, well, I volunteer at Haven's Paw. I found this number on a photo of Anna Harper." Silence. Then a sigh heavy with years. "If Daniel left you that picture, then things are worse than I thought. Who are you?" "Name's Conrad," he said. "I knew Anna. I knew Daniel, too, before he buried himself in walls of money. If Leonard's stirring again, you're going to need help. Where can we meet?" I hesitated. Paranoia whispered that this could be a trap. But something in Conrad's voice, the weariness, the unshakable steadiness, pushed me past fear. We met in a dingy diner on the edge of town. He was older, late 60s maybe, with a face carved by hard years and eyes that still burned sharp. Over black coffee, he listened as I told him everything. Harper's will, Leonard's threats, the dog tag. When I finished, Conrad tapped the table with one finger. "Leonard's not just angry, he's desperate. He gambled away most of what he had after Daniel cut him out. You're the last obstacle between him and the scraps of his empire." "So what do I do?" I asked. "You stand your ground," Conrad said simply. "But you don't stand alone." He reached into his jacket and slid me a card with a name and number. "That's Marisol. She worked with Anna on the first rescues. If anyone still carries her fire, it's her." For the first time in weeks, hope flickered. Maybe this wasn't just my fight. Maybe this was about reviving the network Anna and Daniel had started, the people who loved Haven S. Paw for more than its money. But Leonard was already tightening the screws. 2 nights later, I returned to my apartment to find the door ajar. My breath froze. I pushed it open and saw the chaos. Drawers yanked out, cushions slashed, papers scattered. Nothing was stolen, except one thing. The envelope with Daniel's handwritten letter was gone. On the kitchen counter, a single Polaroid sat waiting. It was of me, taken through my own living room window, scrawled on the bottom, "Next time, we won't just take paper." I sank into a chair, the photo shaking in my grip. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was invasion, violation, and it was escalating. The next morning, I called Conrad with a voice that barely held steady. He was inside my home. Conrad's answer was calm, almost too calm. "Then it's time you learned what kind of war Leonard is willing to fight, and what Daniel always feared would happen after he was gone." I stared out the shelter window at the city humming obliviously beyond, the dogs barking faintly in the background. My old life, mocked weekends, quiet volunteering, laughter from friends who didn't understand, was gone. I was stepping into something bigger, darker. And somewhere in the shadows, Leonard Harper was waiting for me to stumble. Conrad didn't waste time after my call. Within an hour, a dented pickup truck pulled up outside Haven's Paw, and he stepped out with the same hard-eyed look he'd worn in the diner. In the passenger seat sat a woman with dark hair streaked silver, a faded denim jacket on her shoulders. "That's Marisol," Conrad said as they came inside. She was Anna's right hand back when Haven S. Paw was just a van and a handful of kennels. Marisol's handshake was firm, her eyes assessing. "You're the one Daniel left the keys to," she said quietly. "He must have seen something." "I don't know what he saw," I admitted, "but Leonard's making sure I regret it." She gave a dry smile. "Then you're already one of us." We sat in the break room after hours, the smell of kibble and bleach still in the air. Conrad spread out a map of the city, marking with a pen. "Leonard's people have been showing up here, here, and here. Watching, probing. He's not stupid. He knows he can't just waltz in and take the trust. But he can scare you, isolate you, make you slip." "Then how do we stop him?" I asked. Marisol leaned forward. "Daniel always kept a backup plan, not just the trust, the evidence of what Leonard did, records, transfers, names. If we can find it, we can bury him before he buries you." I thought of the dog tag, of the Polaroid. Leonard wasn't just after money. He was making this personal, reaching back into Harper history to pull every string he could. "Where would Daniel keep something like that?" I asked. Conrad and Marisol exchanged a look. "Anna's cabin," Marisol said finally. "Upstate. Daniel never sold it, never even changed the locks." A cold thrill passed through me. Anna's cabin, the heart of all of this. We agreed to leave at dawn. Ruth promised to watch the shelter. "Just come back," she said, squeezing my hand. "We can't lose you, too." The drive upstate was gray and tense. Trees blurred past in the fog, the radio silent. My thoughts churned like the wheels on the wet asphalt. For the first time, I was deliberately stepping into Harper territory. Daniel's ghosts, Anna's dreams, Leonard's rage. When we reached the cabin, it looked like a photograph left too long in the sun, peeling paint, sagging porch, windows clouded with dust. But the padlock on the door was new. Conrad frowned. Daniel's lock was brass, not steel. Marisol scanned the tree line. "We're not the first ones here." My pulse spiked. We approached slowly, the damp boards creaking underfoot. Conrad produced a set of picks from his pocket and made short work of the lock. Inside, the air was musty, tinged with old pine and something faintly medicinal. Anna's life lingered in the details. A framed photo of her first rescue dog, a faded quilt over the couch, notebooks stacked on the desk. And on the desk, an empty space where something rectangular had once sat, marked by a dustless outline. "Too late," Marisol murmured. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. "Leonard?" Conrad bent to pick up a scrap of paper from the floor. He handed it to me silently. It was another Polaroid, this time of the three of us, taken through the cabin window, written beneath it. "You're trespassing." Marisol's face went pale. "He's here." A sound creaked from the back of the cabin, floorboards shifting under weight. Conrad gestured for silence and slipped toward the hallway, his hand already curling into a fist. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, every muscle tight. This wasn't the city now. This was Leonard's playing field, remote, silent, and far from help. A shadow moved at the edge of the hallway, just out of sight. And then a voice, low and cold, floated through the cabin. "You should have walked away while you could." Marisol's hand closed on my arm, grounding me. "Stay behind me," she whispered. Conrad took a step forward into the dark hall. "Show yourself, Leonard. This isn't your house anymore." A soft laugh answered. "It's always been mine." Something in the air shifted, the tension before a storm breaks. Dogs barked faintly in my memory, though here there were none, only the creak of the old cabin and the three of us holding our breath. For the first time since inheriting Daniel Harper's fortune, I realized I might not leave this fight alive. Conrad braced in the hallway, his shoulders squared like a soldier who'd done this before. I stayed crouched near the desk, every nerve raw. Marisol's grip on my arm was steady, though her eyes flicked toward the window, calculating. Leonard stepped into the faint light, a man in his early 50s, his resemblance to Daniel uncanny, but twisted, like a reflection in broken glass. His suit was expensive but rumpled, his hair slicked back too tightly. He carried no weapon that I could see, but the menace clung to him like smoke. "So," Leonard said softly, "this is the fool Daniel chose." His eyes landed on me, and a slow smile spread. "I thought you'd be taller." My mouth was dry. "Why are you doing this?" "Why?" He laughed, a sound too sharp for the quiet cabin. "Because my cousin took everything that should have been mine. Do you know how many years I spent building his empire, only to be cast out because of a little mismanagement?" He spat the word. "And now he leaves his legacy to a kennel scrubber? It's an insult." Conrad stepped between us. "You laundered money through Haven's paw. You nearly destroyed it. Daniel had every right to cut you out." Leonard's face twitched. "And he had no right to replace me with this nobody." He jabbed a finger at me. "You don't know what you're holding. That trust isn't just charity money, it's leverage, land, partnerships, assets you haven't even found yet. Give it to me, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Marisol's voice was ice. "Daniel trusted him because he wouldn't hand it to you." Leonard's smile faded. He reached into his jacket, and for a sickening heartbeat, I thought it was a gun. But when his hand emerged, it held a small USB drive dangling from a chain. He tossed it onto the desk in front of me. "This," he said, "is what I took from the cabin before you got here. Daniel's insurance policy. Every document tying me to the past. Destroy it, and you'll never have to see me again. Keep it." His eyes gleamed. "And you'll never sleep easy another night in your life." The drive was scuffed, ordinary, but it might as well have been a grenade sitting inches from my hand. I stared at it, then at Leonard. "If it's so dangerous to you, why give it back?" He leaned closer, his voice a hiss. "Because I want to see what you'll do. Daniel thought you had strength. I think you're just another weak do-gooder who'll break when it matters." Conrad's fists clenched. "You're testing him." Leonard smiled thinly. "Exactly, and when he fails, Haven's paw dies with him." The silence stretched. My thoughts screamed in every direction. Destroy the drive and maybe buy peace, keep it and risk everything or call his bluff. Then, suddenly, the floorboards groaned outside the cabin. Leonard's head snapped toward the door. Marisol's hand tightened on my arm. A second later, headlights swept across the windows, flooding the room with harsh white. A car engine idled outside, too close. Leonard's smile twisted. Looks like my ride's here. He stepped back, eyes never leaving mine. Think carefully, volunteer. The dogs can't protect you from me. He slipped into the hallway and was gone before Conrad could lunge. By the time we reached the porch, the SUV was already tearing down the dirt road, its red taillights vanishing into the trees. The three of us stood in the damp night air, the cabin looming silent behind us. My hand still shook as I clutched the USB drive. Marisol finally broke the silence. That's not just leverage, that's a declaration of war. Conrad turned to me, his gaze hard. So, what do you want to do? We can hand it to the authorities, expose Leonard completely, but once it's out, there's no going back. Or, he glanced toward the road. We play it his way, quiet, careful, but dangerous. I looked down at the drive, the metal cold against my skin. Daniel C.'s voice echoed in my memory. Use this gift to save what I could not. And I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Anna, Daniel, Haven's paw, and the choice between survival and legacy. I'm not destroying it, I said finally. If Leonard wants me afraid, he's going to be disappointed. The words felt like fire in my throat, dangerous and impossible to swallow back. Conrad nodded once, approval flickering in his eyes. Marisol squeezed my shoulder. But in the woods beyond, I couldn't shake the feeling that Leonard was still watching, still waiting, and that the real fight had only just begun. Conrad didn't say another word on the drive back down the mountain. The rain drummed against the windshield, a steady, relentless sound, while Marisol sat in the back seat with her eyes fixed on the USB drive in my hands. It felt heavier the longer I held it, as if the metal had soaked up every secret Daniel Harper had buried. Halfway back to the city, Conrad finally spoke. We need to see what's on it. I nodded, but said nothing. My throat felt like sandpaper. We waited until we were in my apartment. Marisol checked the locks twice, drew the curtains, then produced a small, battered laptop from her bag. Air-gapped, she said quietly. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. If Leonard left any surprises on this, it won't get out. My fingers hesitated over the USB port. What if it's nothing? Marisol's eyes were steady. Then we'll know. The drive clicked into place with a tiny sound that echoed louder than it should have. Folders popped up on the screen, dozens of them, each labeled with years. 2002, 2003, 2004, all the way to the present. Inside, scanned contracts, wire transfers, shell companies, secret memos. Leonard's entire career of corruption laid bare. This isn't just bad bookkeeping, Conrad muttered, scrolling through documents. This is criminal, racketeering, fraud, offshore laundering, enough to bury him for life. Then we found the last folder. It wasn't dated. It was named simply Anna. My heart thudded. I double-clicked. Inside were old emails, letters Daniel had written but never sent. Notes about Anna's death, his grief, his obsession with finding the man who caused the crash. But there was more. A list of names, witnesses, private investigators. One name at the bottom circled in red. Leonard Harper. Marisol's breath caught. He knew. Knew what? I asked. That Leonard was behind it, Conrad said. Not the driver, Leonard. Paid off the driver, hid him abroad. Daniel suspected for years but couldn't prove it. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Leonard hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen Anna. He'd killed her dream at the root. And now Daniel had handed me the proof. I closed the laptop slowly. We take this to the police. Now. Conrad hesitated. You could. but Leonard's lawyers will bury it in motions before the ink's dry. You'll be dragged through court for years, and Haven's paw will bleed out while you fight. Marisol leaned forward. Or we go public. Leak it all. Media, activists, everyone. The kind of storm Leonard can't control. I thought of the dogs sleeping in their kennels, oblivious, of Ruth and the other volunteers, of the new equipment, the repaired roof. Haven's paw was more than a shelter now. It was a symbol of everything Anna and Daniel had built. If Leonard destroyed me, he'd destroy that too. I swallowed hard. We go public. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff. For the next week, we worked in secret. Marisol contacted old reporters who'd written about Haven's paw years ago. Conrad compiled the evidence into a watertight dossier. I wrote a statement about Daniel, Anna, and the trust. My hands shaking, but my voice steady. The night before the release, I sat alone in the shelter's office, the dogs breathing softly in the dark. On the desk lay Anna's dog tag. I picked it up, ran my thumb over the worn letters. I won't waste it, I whispered. At dawn, the files went out. Hundreds of pages of proof to every major outlet in the city. Emails, contracts, transfers, and the story behind Anna's death. For hours, silence. Then the storm hit. Headlines blared. Billionaire's cousin implicated in laundering scheme. Harper family legacy in turmoil. Reporters swarmed Leonard's mansion. News vans parked outside Haven's paw. And then the calls started. First Ruth, weeping with relief. They're saying you're a hero, she said. You saved the shelter. Then my sister, her voice small. I didn't know, she whispered. Then Devin, sheepish. Man, you're all over the news. But the last call was Leonard. I didn't recognize the number, but his voice was unmistakable. Low, controlled, dangerous. You think this is over, he said quietly. It's not. You've just made it blood. The line went dead. I stood there, the phone cold in my hand, feeling the weight of what I'd done. For the first time, Leonard Harper wasn't a shadow lurking at the edge of my life. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals lash out. Marisol's voice cut through my thoughts. He's not going to take this lying down. Be ready. I looked out at the rows of kennels, at the lives depending on me, at the legacy of Anna and Daniel Harper burning like a torch I'd been forced to carry. I am, I said. But even as I spoke, I felt it. The air before a storm, electric and heavy. Leonard was out there, and he wasn't finished. And I knew the real battle was only beginning. The city didn't sleep the night the story broke. Every channel, every feed, every front page had Leonard Harper's face plastered across it. Anchors dissected the financial evidence, talking heads speculated about prison time, and every hour another damning detail surfaced. At Haven's paw, the phones rang off the hook. Reporters wanted statements, activists wanted alliances, donors wanted to pledge money. Ruth had to turn off the front lights just to keep people from banging on the doors after midnight. But amid the chaos, I felt it. That tightening in my chest that told me Leonard wasn't retreating. He was waiting. The first shot came 3 days later. A volunteer named Tina, a college sophomore with a gentle way around nervous rescues, came into my office, pale and trembling. There were men in suits outside my dorm, she said. They asked me questions about you, about the shelter. They knew my schedule. I clenched my fists under the desk. What kind of questions? If you've been paying me, if I've seen you do anything shady. She swallowed hard. I got scared. I didn't say anything, but what if they come back? Marisol, standing by the doorway, said flatly. They will. Leonard's trying to rattle your people. Conrad growled. Classic move. He knows he can't hit you directly right now, so he'll make the people around you suffer until you cave. I wanted to promise Tina it would be okay, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I walked her home myself that evening, the streets buzzing with neon and shadow, my every step taut with the expectation of being followed. When I returned, the shelter's gate had been slashed open. Inside, kennels stood wide, doors swinging. Dogs barked wildly, running in every direction, some terrified, some snapping at each other. "Jesus!" Ruth gasped as she rushed out with a flashlight. "They've been here!" It took 3 hours, with every volunteer we could muster, to round up the dogs and check them over. Miraculously, none were seriously hurt. But the message was clear. Leonard wasn't just trying to ruin me. He was going after Haven's Paw itself. The next morning, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a collar, blood-stained. My stomach turned over, but when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't from one of our dogs. The tag read, Max, with an address from across town. Conrad checked. Sure enough, the dog was gone, stolen from a family yard in the night. "This is escalating," he said grimly. "He's making it clear that no animal, no person connected to you is safe." I sat at my desk, the collar heavy in my hands. The USB drive lay on the table beside it, still full of Leonard's sins. Proof that could crush him further if I dared push harder. Marisol leaned in, her eyes fierce. "You can't back down now. Anna wouldn't have. Daniel didn't. Leonard is betting you don't have the stomach for a long fight." "And if I don't?" I asked bitterly. "If I walk away, if I hand it over, maybe he leaves us alone." Conrad's voice was sharp. "You really believe that? Men like Leonard don't stop. He'll gut Haven's Paw the second you let go. Then he'll erase Daniel and Anna completely." Silence pressed down on us, thick as smoke. Finally, Ruth spoke from the doorway. Her voice was quiet but steady. "We've been saving lives in this place since long before anyone knew your name. We'll keep saving them after. But you—" She fixed her eyes on me, unwavering. "You're the one holding the line. Don't you dare give in." Her words hit like a hammer against the doubt gnawing at me. I closed my hand around the USB drive. "Then we go on offense." Marisol arched an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "Leonard thinks fear is enough," I said. "Let's show him what happens when the truth is louder than his threats." For the next week, I burned every hour digging deeper. With Conrad's old contacts and Marisol's tenacity, we connected dots the press hadn't reached yet. Offshore accounts tied to Leonard, shell companies linked to abandoned real estate, even payments to lobbyists who'd smothered animal protection bills. We compiled it all, not just as evidence, but as a story, a clear, brutal picture of who Leonard Harper really was. On a Friday morning, we released it in a press conference at the shelter. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded, reporters shouted questions. I stood behind the podium with the photo of Anna Harper projected on the screen behind me. "This shelter was her dream," I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled. "Daniel Harper spent his life protecting it, and his cousin has spent his life trying to destroy it. This ends now." The room erupted. Headlines flew before I'd even stepped down. "Shelter volunteer exposes billionaire's crimes. Anna Harper's legacy avenged." For a fleeting moment, it felt like victory. But that night, when I returned home, the lock on my door was already broken. The apartment was dark, silent. On the table sat a single Polaroid. This time, it wasn't me. It was Ruth, bound to a chair, her eyes wide, terrified, scrawled beneath it in black ink. "Your move." The photo slipped from my hands and landed face down on the floor, but the image seared itself into me, refusing to leave. Ruth, bound, terrified. My lungs tightened as if invisible hands were closing around my throat. Conrad and Marisol burst into the apartment minutes later, summoned by the panicked call I barely remembered making. Conrad picked up the Polaroid, jaw tight. "He's escalating faster than I thought." Marisol's fists clenched. "He's not bluffing. If Leonard has Ruth, he's crossed the line into open war." I staggered toward the window, staring at the city lights, each one mocking me with its calm glow. "What if I call the police? Show them this?" Conrad shook his head. "He's too careful. By the time they move, she'll be gone. Or worse. This isn't about law anymore. It's personal. He wants you to choose. I turned, voice breaking. Choose what? Marisol's gaze was flint. Between protecting yourself and saving her. Silence filled the room, punctuated only by the hum of the fridge and the pounding of my heart. I thought of Ruth's steady hands calming frightened dogs, of her fierce insistence that Daniel trusted me for a reason, if Leonard hurt her because of me. I grabbed the USB drive from the desk, my knuckles white around it. He wants this. He thinks it's the leash around my neck. Fine, then I'll give it to him. Conrad's hand shot out, gripping my shoulder. You do that, he wins, and Ruth still dies. I stared at him, fury and despair boiling together. Then tell me what the hell I'm supposed to do. He held my gaze a long moment, then said, We set a trap. Marisol stepped closer. Leonard thinks he controls the board, but he's impatient, reckless. If we make him believe you're willing to trade the drive for Ruth, he'll show himself. And then what? I demanded. Conrad's voice dropped to a growl. Then we take him off the board. The plan was dangerous, desperate, but there was no other path left. We crafted the message carefully. Me, Conrad, and Marisol huddled around the battered laptop in the shelter office. A simple email sent to the anonymous address Leonard had once used to taunt me. I'll bring the drive. You bring Ruth. Midnight. The old rail yard. We chose the rail yard because it was isolated but open, full of shadows but not cages, a place where betrayal would have nowhere to hide. As the hour drew near, I tucked Anna's dog tag into my pocket, a talisman against the terror gnawing my insides. Marisol pressed a small recorder into my hand. Whatever happens, make sure this stays on. The world needs to hear him admit it. Conrad adjusted the heavy flashlight he carried like a club. Stay close. Don't try to play hero. Just buy us the moment. The rail yard was a graveyard of rusting steel and weeds, the air heavy with the smell of oil and rain-soaked iron. Midnight came, and with it, headlights. A black SUV rolled to a stop, its engine growling low. The back door opened. Ruth stumbled out, wrists bound, eyes wide with terror. A man in a suit shoved her forward, and behind him emerged Leonard, calm, smiling, immaculate. You brought my prize, he called, his voice echoing across the empty lot. I stepped forward, the USB drive raised in my hand. And you brought mine. Leonard's smile widened. Good. Let's finish this farce. He moved closer, his men fanning out in the shadows. Ruth's breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled toward me, the guard's hand gripping her arm tight. Hand it over, Leonard said. His eyes gleamed. And maybe she lives. Behind me, I felt Conrad shift, waiting for the opening. Marisol's hand brushed mine briefly, a silent reminder not to break. I raised the drive higher, heart hammering. You'll let her go first. Leonard chuckled. Still pretending you have leverage? Cute. He gestured, and the guard shoved Ruth forward. She fell to her knees, scrambling to her feet. Now, Leonard said, extending his hand. The drive. I took one step forward, the weight of every choice pressing down on me. The dogs, the shelter, Anna, Daniel, Ruth, all of it balanced on the edge of that tiny piece of metal. Then I flicked the drive into the air. For one frozen heartbeat, every pair of eyes followed it as it spun in the floodlight. And in that heartbeat, Conrad moved. He surged from the shadows like a storm, flashlight cracking against the guard's skull. Ruth screamed as Marisol darted in, dragging her clear. Chaos exploded. Leonard lunged for the falling drive. And I, for the first time since this war began, lunged straight for him. Leonard's hand and mine struck the gravel at the same instant, both reaching for the glinting flash drive. His fingers brushed it first, but I slammed my palm over his wrist and drove it down hard into the rocks. He snarled, his teeth bared like an animal. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed, spittle flecking his lips. "This is bigger than you, bigger than that pathetic shelter." "Then why are you so afraid of it?" I shot back, twisting his arm. He roared, wrenching against me, but years of anger and exhaustion had dulled his edge. I pinned him long enough to feel the drive's sharp edge under my other hand. A crack rang out, Conrad's flashlight smashing another guard to the ground. Ruth, shaking but fierce, kicked at the shin of the man who tried to grab her again. Marisol had her arm locked around Ruth's shoulders, pulling her toward the shadows, eyes scanning for danger. Leonard heaved under me, his strength sudden and furious. He flipped us both, gravel grinding into my back, the breath knocked out of me. His hands clamped around my throat. "You think Daniel was noble?" he spat, pressing harder. "He was weak. He wasted everything on dogs and ghosts. I'm the one who should have inherited his empire, not you, not anyone." The world narrowed to a tunnel. My vision blurred, the edges blackening. My fingers fumbled, desperate, until they closed on the drive still trapped between us. With the last scrap of strength, I jammed it against his cheek. He recoiled with a howl, the corner cutting skin. The pressure on my throat loosened just enough for me to twist free. Conrad was there in an instant, dragging Leonard off me and slamming him into the side of the SUV. Leonard struggled, but Conrad's grip was iron. "It's over," Conrad growled. "No," Leonard snarled, blood streaking his face. "Not until he's ruined, just like Anna." The words tore through me like lightning. Anna. He'd said it out loud. My hand shot to the recorder Marisol had given me, still clipped to my jacket. The red light blinked steadily. Every word had been captured. Marisol's voice cut the night like a blade. "We've got it." She held up her phone, already broadcasting live to the stream she'd set rolling the second the SUV pulled in. Thousands would be hearing Leonard's confession in real time. Leonard froze. His eyes darted from me to the camera, to Conrad's unyielding grip. "You," he whispered, disbelief dripping from his tone. "You trapped me." I staggered to my feet, my voice hoarse but steady. "No. You trapped yourself the day you betrayed them." The silence stretched, broken only by Leonard's ragged breathing and the distant hum of the city. Then, in the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder, closer, unstoppable. Leonard thrashed, but Conrad held him like stone. Ruth clung to Marisol, tears streaking her dirt-smeared face, but her chin lifted defiantly. Headlights washed over us again, this time red and blue. Squad cars screeched into the lot, doors flying open, officers shouting commands. Within minutes, Leonard was shoved into cuffs, his protests drowned out by the chaos. When they drove him away, the night finally went still. I dropped to my knees on the gravel, the weight of everything crashing down at once. Ruth knelt beside me, her voice trembling but firm. "You did it. You saved us." "No," I whispered, clutching Anna's dog tag in my fist. "We did." Marisol crouched, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Daniel would be proud. Anna, too." Conrad gave a rare, grim smile. "And now the world knows the truth. Haven's Paw is safe." Safe. The word felt fragile, tentative. But as I looked at Ruth, Marisol, Conrad, and the distant skyline, I realized something deeper. The laughter, the mockery, the doubts. They had all burned away in the fire Leonard tried to set. What remained was the legacy Anna began, the faith Daniel placed, and the family we'd forged in the fight. For the first time since that will was read, I didn't feel like a fraud wearing someone else's inheritance. I felt like its keeper. And in that cold rail yard, beneath the sirens fading into the night, I swore I'd carry it for the rest of my life. The rail yard emptied slowly, the clatter of boots and radios fading as the last patrol car pulled away with Leonard inside. The night air settled heavy and damp, broken only by the distant drip of water from rusted gutters and the sharp smell of oil-soaked gravel. We didn't move for a long time. Ruth leaned against Marisol, her hands still trembling from the ropes that had bound her. Conrad stood a few feet away, scanning the darkness as though expecting Leonard to reappear even in handcuffs. Finally, Ruth whispered, "I thought he was going to kill me." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. Ruth never cried. She just looked at me, eyes wide, demanding an answer to the unspoken question. Why did I have to be the one he took? I swallowed hard. Because you're the heart of Haven's paw. He knew hurting you would hurt all of us. He thought I'd break. Her lips trembled. But you didn't. I shook my head, voice low. Not this time. Marisol put an arm around her shoulders. He underestimated you both. That was his mistake. Conrad finally turned, the faintest nod of approval in his weathered face. The war's not over. His lawyers will spin. His allies will circle the wagons. But tonight, he glanced at me, tonight you beat him. The weight of his words settled deep. I hadn't just survived. I'd outplayed Leonard in the open, with his own confession broadcast to the world. Yet even in victory, unease gnawed at me. Leonard was a viper. Even cut, he'd still writhe and bite. We bundled Ruth into Conrad's truck and drove back to the city as dawn crept over the horizon. The skyline glowed pink and gold, indifferent to the blood and sweat we'd spilled. At the shelter, the dogs stirred awake as we walked in, tails thumping against kennel doors, voices rising in a chorus of barks. Ruth bent to press her face against one of the cages, whispering, "We're okay. We're home." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. But the world outside Haven's paw was far from calm. By noon, reporters swarmed the gates, cameras flashing, microphones thrust through the bars. Headlines screamed across every screen. Harper cousin confesses in shocking midnight sting. Shelter volunteer exposes billionaire family's dark secrets. Legacy of Anna Harper restored. Donations poured in from strangers across the country. Letters arrived by the dozens, people thanking us for saving animals, for standing against corruption, for refusing to give up. Haven's paw wasn't just a shelter anymore, it had become a symbol. Yet in the quiet moments when the lights dimmed and the reporters drifted away, doubt still whispered. Leonard had money, he had power, and even in chains, men like him didn't just vanish. That night, as I sat alone in the office, Anna's dog tag cool against my palm, the phone rang. No caller ID. My stomach clenched. I answered. On the other end, silence. Then a voice. Not Leonard's, but calm, unfamiliar, chilling. "You made quite a spectacle," the man said. "But Leonard wasn't the only Harper who wanted that trust. There are others, and they're not as patient as he was." The line clicked dead. I sat frozen, the hum of the shelter lights buzzing overhead, the dogs shifting restlessly in their kennels. The fight with Leonard had ended, but a deeper truth pressed in like a storm cloud. I hadn't inherited peace. I'd inherited a battlefield, and the Harpers weren't finished with me, not by a long shot. I sat there in the dark office long after the call ended, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a hornet. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a prank, some vulture journalist trying to spook me. But the voice had been too measured, too calm, like a man already certain of his power. There are others. The words clung to me like smoke. By the time Conrad and Marisol came in the next morning, I hadn't slept. I slid them both cups of stale coffee and told them about the call. Conrad swore under his breath. I knew Leonard wasn't working alone. Families like that don't crumble with just one rotten apple. They rot root to branch. Marisol tapped the dog tag that hung around my neck. Daniel knew it too. That's why he left you more than money. He left you the fight. I rubbed at my temples. I'm not a soldier. I never asked for this. Conrad's gaze was sharp. Neither did Anna. She just wanted to save dogs. But she stood her ground anyway. Now it's your turn. The shelter filled quickly that day, volunteers, donors dropping off supplies, reporters still hovering outside. But beneath the surface, a tension hummed. Every unfamiliar face set my teeth on edge. By evening, Ruth cornered me in the supply room. She looked stronger, steadier, though shadows lingered under her eyes from the ordeal. "I know you're scared," she said. "I am too. But don't you dare think about walking away now. Heaven's paw needs you." Her words were a tether, pulling me back from the spiral. That night, another letter slid under the shelter door. Plain envelope. Inside, a single sheet. "You've embarrassed one, Harper. Do you think the rest will forgive you? We're coming for what's ours." No signature. Marisol read it, then tore it in half. "Good. Let them come into the light. Shadows are where they're strongest." Conrad leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "The next move isn't theirs. It's ours. We dig deeper. Find out who these others are before they find us." Over the next week, the three of us worked like possessed people. Conrad leaned on old contacts, investigators, ex-reporters, even a retired detective who'd once chased Harper money through offshore accounts. Marisol reached back into Anna's early days, calling in favors from people who'd been part of the first rescues. Patterns began to surface. A brother-in-law with suspicious ties to foreign investors. A niece with political ambitions funded by opaque PAC money. A shadowy trust that predated Daniel's, funneling wealth into projects no one dared scrutinize. Every trail pointed to one conclusion. Leonard had been only the opening act. The Harper family tree was tangled with greed, secrets, and enemies who'd rather burn the world than lose their grip. One evening, exhausted and half delirious from coffee and paper stacks, I found another folder buried in the files Conrad had recovered from Daniel's archives. It wasn't financial. It was personal. Letters. Handwritten, all from Daniel to Anna after her death, unsent but carefully saved. In one, his words trembled across the page. "They will come for the shelter, Anna, for your dream." I couldn't stop Leonard, but maybe I can find someone who won't give up, no matter the cost. Someone stubborn enough to keep you alive through Haven's paw. My throat tightened. Daniel hadn't chosen me by accident. He'd seen the stubbornness, the refusal to give up on broken things, and he'd known this storm was coming. I closed the folder and looked up at Conrad and Marisol. Then we don't wait for them to strike. We bring the fight to them. Conrad's grim smile told me he'd been waiting for those words. "Now you're starting to sound like a Harper yourself." Outside, the dogs barked in restless unison, as though sensing the shift. The shelter, Anna's dream, Daniel's legacy, my inheritance, had become the fortress of a new war. And somewhere in the city, the rest of the Harper family was watching, waiting for their chance to strike. I'd thought Leonard was the enemy. Now I realized he was only the beginning. The days that followed felt like the tightening of a noose. Reporters still camped outside the shelter. Donors poured in more money than we'd ever seen. And on the surface, Haven's paw thrived. But beneath that, tension simmered. We weren't just a shelter anymore. We were a battleground. Conrad arrived one morning with a thin manila envelope. He tossed it onto the office desk like a live grenade. "Got this from an old source in the DA's office. Sealed documents. Harper family records. Wasn't easy to pull." I opened it carefully. Inside were birth certificates, property deeds, and financial disclosures that should have been buried in archives. A name jumped out at me. Victoria Harper, Daniel's niece. "She's the real threat," Conrad said, his voice low. "Leonard was sloppy, petty, but Victoria, she's ambitious, cold. Word is she's been grooming herself for a Senate seat. And a scandal this size?" He tapped the desk. "She'll do anything to keep it buried." Marisol leaned in, her jaw tight. "If she's tied to the same offshore accounts, we can expose her too." Cut off the whole branch at the root. But my gut twisted. If we do, she won't just fight us in the press. She'll come after Haven's paw with everything she's got. Ruth, standing quietly in the doorway, finally spoke. So? Then we fight back harder. You think Anna would have folded just because it was risky? Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. You've already taken on Leonard. Don't stop now. Her words lit something in me. Ruth, who had been kidnapped and nearly broken by Leonard, still believed this fight was worth it. If she could stand tall, then so could I. We started digging into Victoria. Publicly, she was polished. A rising political star, all smiles and photo ops with children and veterans. But the deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Campaign donations funneled from shell companies, land deals that displaced entire neighborhoods, whispered rumors of silenced whistleblowers. The evidence piled higher, and with it, the danger. One night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in the office staring at Anna's dog tag, the USB drive, and the folder on Victoria spread across the desk. The dogs were restless, barking more than usual, and I told myself it was nothing, just a storm rolling in. Then the power went out. The shelter plunged into darkness. The hum of the lights died, replaced by the low growl of generators failing to kick in. My phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or the dogs pay first. My blood turned to ice. I ran into the kennels, flashlight beams slicing the dark. The dogs barked, yelped, pressed against their gates. Every lock was intact, every door still shut. But someone had been here. The scent of cologne, sharp, expensive, lingered in the air. Marisol and Conrad rushed back within minutes, both armed with flashlights and fury. Conrad checked the grounds, jaw clenched. They're sending a message. This wasn't Leonard's style. This is Victoria, clean, controlled. She doesn't need to break in, just scare you into silence. Marisol's eyes burned in the dark. Then she doesn't know us very well. I stood in the middle of the shelter, the dogs' cries echoing around me, the weight of Anna's dream pressing down. This was no longer about money, or even about Daniel's will. It was about survival. Ours, the shelters, the legacy Victoria and Leonard both wanted erased. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, on the dog tag hanging from my neck. They want a war? I said, my voice low but steady. Then we'll give them one, but this time on our terms. Conrad's grim smile returned. About damn time. Outside, thunder cracked. The storm had arrived, and so had the next Harper. Rain lashed against the shelter windows that night, each gust rattling the panes like an impatient hand demanding entry. I sat at the office desk with the folder on Victoria Harper spread wide, pages curling in the damp air. Her face stared at me from glossy campaign photos, smiling, poised, untouchable, the perfect mask. Conrad paced the room like a caged wolf. She's sharper than Leonard ever was. No sloppy threats, no broken glass. She'll come at you sideways, through courts, through politics, through the people you love. She doesn't need to scare you into silence. She needs to discredit you. Marisol leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. Which means she'll target the shelter itself. Make it look like we're corrupt. If Haven's paw loses credibility, your inheritance looks like a sham and Daniel's legacy crumbles. That's her battlefield. Ruth, seated quietly with a blanket around her shoulders, finally spoke. So we fight her with the one thing she can't fake. The truth. Her voice was steady, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The memory of Leonard's threat still clung to her like smoke. I stared down at the folder. Offshore accounts, shell donors, evictions tied to her land grabs. Enough evidence to destroy her career, if we could get it out before she buried us. Then we take it public again, I said. My voice didn't tremble this time. But not just to the press, we go bigger. We build a movement she can't silence. Marisol's brow arched. You're talking about going national. International, if we have to, I said. Animal rights groups, activists, whistleblowers. She thought she silenced. If Victoria wants to play in the dark, then we'll flood the board with light. Conrad gave a slow nod, the kind that meant he was already planning logistics in his head. It's dangerous. Once you step onto that stage, you can't ever step off. I know, I said, my hand tightening around Anna's dog tag. But if we don't, she'll keep coming, and Haven's paw will just be the first casualty. The decision hung in the air like lightning before a strike. The next week was a blur of meetings, calls, and strategy. Conrad reached out to his old contacts in investigative journalism. Marisol tapped into a network of grassroots rescue groups across the country. Ruth organized volunteers, turning their fear into fuel, but Victoria was quicker than we expected. One evening, as I walked into the shelter, Ruth rushed toward me with a newspaper clutched in her hand. The headline blared, "Shelter Millionaire Misuses Funds. Questions of Fraud Emerge." My stomach plummeted. The article was full of half-truths and twisted numbers, donations inflated, salaries fabricated, purchases for the shelter spun as personal luxuries. Every detail carefully constructed to paint me as a grifter hiding behind dead billionaires and strays. Marisol slammed the paper down. "She's moving faster than we thought." Conrad growled. "Classic smear. She plants the seed, then lets it spread until no one knows what's true." Phones rang non-stop. Donors called in panic. Reporters circled like sharks, and volunteers whispered with wide eyes in the halls. Haven's paw, once celebrated, was now under suspicion. That night, as I sat in the darkened office, another envelope slid under the door. My chest tightened as I tore it open. Inside was a single campaign flyer. Victoria's face smiled up at me, her slogan bold across the bottom, "For a stronger tomorrow." On the back, in neat handwriting, "Your tomorrow ends when mine begins." The threat wasn't a scream like Leonard's, it was a whisper, a promise. I set the flyer on the desk beside Anna's tag and the fading Polaroid of Ruth. My hands shook, but not from fear this time, from rage. "They think they can bury us," I whispered. "But they've forgotten. Dogs dig, too." The storm had shifted. Leonard's war was over. Victoria's was just beginning. The smear campaign spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, every major outlet had picked it up. Talk shows called me a fraud. Social media teamed with hashtags twisting Haven's paw into a punchline. Donors froze their pledges. A few even demanded refunds. The worst blow came when city inspectors arrived unannounced, clipboards in hand, citing anonymous complaints. They prowled the shelter with flashlights and masks, photographing every cracked tile and rusted hinge. The dogs cowered, barking, confused. By evening, we were served with a notice. Pending investigation. Risk of closure. Ruth slammed the paper onto my desk. "This is her," she spat. "Victoria pulled strings, and now they're coming for the shelter." Conrad leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his face carved in granite. "She's aiming to cut the legs out from under you before you can expose her. Leonard tried brute force. Victoria's playing chess." Marisol's eyes burned with fury. "Then we stopped playing defense, we hit back harder." But how? My body ached with exhaustion, my mind fogged by weeks of threats and battles. And yet when I looked out at the kennels, at the dogs that wagged their tails even in chaos, I knew retreat wasn't an option. That night, we gathered in the shelter's office. Me, Ruth, Conrad, and Marisol. Papers and laptops spread across the desk like maps before a siege. Rain hammered the roof, thunder rolling in the distance. "We need a leak," Marisol said. "Something undeniable. Something so big it overshadows her smear campaign." Conrad nodded slowly. "The offshore accounts. We've got hard proof of her PAC funneling illegal money. If we push it to the right people, it won't just make headlines. It'll bury her Senate dreams." "But we can't just dump files," I argued. She'll claim they're fabricated, and with her resources, people will believe her. Ruth's voice cut in, sharp and clear. Then we don't just leak it, we show our faces. We tell the story ourselves. Haven's Paw isn't about money, it's about lives. If people see that, they'll know who's lying. Her words struck me like a bell ringing true. The next morning, we filmed it. Not in a studio, not with polished lighting, but in the shelter itself. The camera showed the kennels, the dogs pressing close, the volunteers working despite the storm. Then it turned to me. I told them everything. Daniel's will, Leonard's threats, Ruth's kidnapping, Victoria's smear campaign, and most of all, the truth about Anna, the dream she started, the dream I refused to let die. My voice shook at first, but as I spoke, it steadied. Because it wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. Marisol cut the video with documents, account transfers, fake donors, shell companies, all tied directly to Victoria Harper's campaign. The proof was overwhelming. We uploaded it at midnight. By dawn, it had gone viral. The backlash was immediate. Reporters swarmed Victoria's headquarters, shouting questions. Activist groups rallied to Haven's Paw, flooding us with support. Donations, once frozen, now poured in faster than ever. But victory was fragile. That afternoon, as the shelter buzzed with cautious hope, Conrad burst in, his phone in hand, his face grim. "She's not backing down." He set the phone on the desk. A video played, grainy footage from a hidden camera. Me, in the shelter office, holding the USB drive, saying, "If I hand it over, maybe he leaves us alone." Out of context, twisted, it looked like I'd been bargaining all along. The clip cut off. Then a voice, Victoria's, calm and sharp. "Do you really trust him with your future?" My stomach dropped. She had footage from Leonard's setup at the rail yard. She'd taken my weakest moment and weaponized it. Marisol swore. She's not just fighting in the courts or the press. She's fighting in the shadows with everything Leonard left her. I sank into the chair, the walls pressing in. The truth was out there, but so was her poison. Every move forward, she struck back harder. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder. "She's trying to make you doubt yourself. Don't let her. Daniel believed in you. Anna would too. And so do we." Outside, the storm finally broke, rain pounding like drums on the roof. I looked at them, Conrad, Marisol, Ruth, and at the dogs curled in their kennels, depending on us. "We take the fight to her," I said, my voice iron. "Not just with files, not just with videos. We find her weakest point, the one thing she can't spin, and we end this." Conrad's eyes narrowed. "Then you'd better be ready. Because going after Victoria Harper directly?" He leaned forward. "That's not just war. That's assassination of a dynasty." And for the first time, I didn't flinch. Because if that's what it took to protect Haven's Paw, then so be it. Months later, the world moved on. The Harpers faded from the headlines, their empire fractured by scandal and silence. The dynasty that once towered over the city was reduced to a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. But Haven's Paw grew. With the trust secure and the flood of new support, we expanded into clinics, adoption centers, and outreach programs. Dogs that would have been lost found homes, and people who once mocked me now lined up to volunteer. Ruth laughed again, her strength a beacon for everyone who entered. Marisol became the shelter's compass, unshakable and tireless. Conrad, though he never stopped watching the shadows, finally allowed himself the rare luxury of peace. And me, I stopped asking, why me? Daniel's letter no longer felt like a mystery, but a charge I had fulfilled. I wasn't chosen to inherit money. I was chosen to carry a torch. One quiet evening, I walked through the kennels as the dogs slept, their breathing soft, their trust in me absolute. I paused beneath Anna's photograph on the wall, her smile frozen in time, the shepherd at her side. "We did it," I whispered. The journey had begun with laughter at my expense, with doubt and ridicule. It had wound through threats, kidnappings, betrayals, and storms. And it had ended not with riches or power, but with something far greater: purpose. Daniel had left me $10 million. But what he truly gave me was the unshakable truth that no life dedicated to compassion is ever wasted. The Harpers had tried to end a dream. Instead, they made it immortal. And in that, I found my final peace.